they were turned back to their original sources. But also there were Jews who were persecuted. And it was the Jews who benefited most from the enlightenment which was brought by Islam. And they occupied the most important positions in the government of Spain, the Moorish as they call it, but the Muslim government of Spain. So when they were persecuted, they were not pushed eastwards, they were pushed westward. They came with the torches they held high of knowledge and expertise they had learned in the Islamic regime of Spain, Moorish regime of Muslims in Spain. They brought those torches, carried it to south of France, forward, then to England, to Germany, elsewhere. And the Jews were the first torchbearers of two deep, not religious, but ethical, the scientific knowledge which led to the new sciences which we find today in Europe.
Quite right.
And they were given birth in that time which is they refer to as Renaissance. But they stop there, they don't go forward beyond that. So in answer to your question, I had to take you back to those periods so that also I could remind the West that it has not always been only the threat from Islam, but the very supremacy you hold today in the world, you owe to Islamic efforts. And their attitude to knowledge, their attitude to nature and sciences, etc., which have resulted with the grace of Allah in the present state of the Christian advancement in these sciences. But from looking at it from the Christian vantage point, we cannot ignore the fact that there was always a political threat for the south of Europe from Islam. When later on these so-called holy wars referred to as the wars of the crescent and the wars of the cross resulted in a much larger, bigger front of Islamic political power under the Ottoman Empire. Then it was no longer a case of Palestine and its liberation. A wide wall was created in the south of Europe, extending up to Eastern Europe by the Ottomans. And unless Europe West could break that wall, they could not penetrate beyond. So from then on, it was not just a Muslim war or a Christian war, a war which had got turned into a much wider perspective, fought over a much wider canvas of human history. There, it was not the south which was threatened this time. It was the east of Europe which was threatened. And Bosnia is a direct child of that problem. So I think I have spoken enough of the background, because you're all learned people, you understand what I'm speaking about. So there is a much bigger and much deeper history of mutual distrust between the Christian world and the Muslim world. That distrust is basically not religious, but political. As long as there was polarization between the West and the Eastern European Empire of Russia, that these issues were subdued, were of lesser importance. Now that there is no more that polarization, the West considers it its prime responsibility to recreate the wall between the Western values, the Western way of life, and the possible future threat from Islam. Now, unfortunately, this situation is further made complex by the attitude of the Muslims themselves.
Quite right.
Maududi being in the forefront. The Khomeinis are another figure of the same phenomenon behind. Just the faces change, but the principles do not. The same threat emanates from Libya, from other sources in the Muslim world, and these threats are in fact hurting the cause of Islam far more than they are hurting the cause of Christian world, or even potentially they can ever hurt the cause of Christianity. They know it better than anybody else. There are threats in the name of Islam. As they raise their head, these heads of the snakes begin to bite the very Muslim powers who nurture them. The very interest of the soils on which they're raised. Fight between Muslims of Egypt and the Muslims of Egypt, the fight between Muslims of Algeria, Muslim of Algeria, Muslim of Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. So the Western people fully realize that in reality there is no potent threat but to muster the common forces of Europe against a possible threat of Islam. The material is already provided to them by the Muslims' own stupid behavior. Why not utilize it? For the sake of a future rainy day. And that is exactly what they're doing. We are fighting against big odds, Ahmadis. When we raise the voice in defense of Islam and draw their attention to the real factors responsible for all this, with reference to the real history, they know well. They themselves reject us in the name that you, a small thing, you are not Muslims. And there they quote the non-Ahmadi Muslim scholars who in fact are responsible for creating threats against them. They take sides with them. So in the final analysis, it is just diplomacy and politics which you see, not a real religious confrontation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, please.
A very small question. My name is Tariq and I'm from Jeddah, Saudi Arabia.
Yes.
I just want to ask, when you plan to come to Saudi Arabia to perform Hajj or Umrah?
You see, the Hajj and Umrah issue again is deeply rooted in Muslim history itself.
Yeah.
It's not for the first time that those who claim to be the Muslims, and the true Muslims for that matter, were prevented from performing Umrah and Hajj. You know when it started? It started at the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Read Surah Al-Fatah and you'll find it mentioned there and discussed in other hadith. The first man we know in the history of Islam who was prevented from forcibly for performing Umrah and Hajj was Hadhrat Muhammad Rasulullah himself, the founder of Islam, and his followers. But what was the answer to that problem? That must remain the same answer valid for today. The answer was that as against the advice of his own followers, who had united against Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu interpretation at that time, that is the only time in the history of the companions of the Holy Prophet that they dared to oppose the understanding of the Quran of Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu because they were overwhelmed by emotion. Only temporarily, God forgave them. Mentioned that in Surah Fatah. And what was the issue? Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu understood from the teachings of the Quran that Umrah and Hajj are only compulsory when the conditions are met, prerequisites are met. And one of those prerequisites is peace of the passage and safety. When you are opposed by force not to perform, you must return back to your homes and not perform Hajj. So this is the principal answer which I give to your question. But again, this question is perhaps not based on the exact facts.
Yeah.
Saudi Arabians themselves are not against Ahmadis performing Hajj. Their reaction is always